So, Rajvi, I was rereading your book, Imagine If, and what struck me was something you wrote. You wrote that this is in the tagline, it's stories of ordinary people with extraordinary grit. Now, I came across this word grit somewhere else in research that now shows people who have grit or exhibit grit are the people that are most successful in what they choose to do, even more than IQ levels or educational levels. So I found that very telling. Can you say a little bit more about the people in the book and this quality of, is there a common quality in the people you featured in the book?
So the people I met, most of them I met, it was something they had issues, problems, and everybody feels their problem is big. I mean, when we have a problem, we feel our problem is big. But these people had a problem which was unimaginable. I mean, having cancer again and again and again, it's something which just couldn't register with me. Or to lose your limbs, or how parents handle kids with downs, to lose your vision, to have it and lose it, which is very different. When you don't have it, you learn. So you lose your vision, you lose your speech. And when I met these people, my perception, when I heard about them, oh, it will be so depressing and sad. And here I find them possibly more energetic, more positive, literally, than anybody else. So I realized these are the people, and like you possibly, I hadn't heard about this research, but it possibly tells these people can handle anything, adversity that comes, because we have human form. As much as we would not want anything difficult to come in our life to be smooth, there are going to be ups and downs. I think there'll be very few who would have a very smooth life. So when things do go up and down, how do we handle it? Yes, nature gives us the ability to handle a situation at that point. But when things are so critical, and these are the people who seem to accept it and then move on and do much more. So I was really struck by that. I mean, when I first heard that there was a group of teachers teaching people who had no vision, no speech, and no hearing. And I'm like, how do you teach yoga? I mean, if you can't see, because, with my limited vision, you demonstrate or you speak. How do you teach? So it was just impossible for me to understand. And I kept questioning them, how do you do it? Possibly they got annoyed, or possibly there's no way to express, please come along. And I was just curious. And then to understand the sense of touch, the power of touch, and how these people were so accurate in what they were doing. And what was amazing was we talked of sixth sense of perception. And I remember there were about 10 or 12 of them. And that particular day after the yoga, they did theater. So this group had gone from Israel to Switzerland, and they were all very excited to see a slideshow. Now, again, my brain couldn't comprehend, how do you see a slide presentation? You can't see, you can't hear. And these guys were, so happy. Possibly they could figure out, and there were pictures thrown of them around the snow. And it was very, very empowering for me. I mean, I was just stunned that this is real, true happiness with what we perceive. And with what I thought was minimal, they had something much more. They had this sense of perception. What was shocking is they shook hand and then they did this. So I was surprised. So in sign language, that's an Indian, because Indians put a bindi, and I'm like, and she touched and saying, expressing with her signs that why, at that time I was thin, why is she so thin? And I was so stunned. And then when people were walking, who didn't float, they could gauge who was walking. So I realized how much internal senses of perception, which we also possibly must be having, but are so subdued because we so much use our eyes and ears. So we possibly let go of all the other senses that nature has. And all these people sort of made me realize that there is so much, and the binding thread was yoga. And then I realized, Guruji had talked so much about sparsh. touch and the importance of touch in your practice, internal touch, external touch, and how it makes us so sensitive. So each of these stories, now when I think back, at that point it was a story. It was, oh my God, these people are doing yoga. Let me put it down for people. But the more I got into it, I realized there was so much more to them, and they were more connected to the subject of yoga than possibly I was, because I was practicing it, they were living it. So I found that very, so I think that grit possibly made them do it. We can never say, but I'm sure, I don't know how many people, because if it was a common thing that when you have adversity, you stand up, then we wouldn't feel sad looking at somebody who has lost something in life. So I think these are very unique people.
So that was the chapter about the group who were deaf, blind, and dumb.
Yes.
Couldn't speak. But there was also, so on that thread of developing sensitivity, there was another chapter of a lady who was blind.
Yes, Bridget.
Is it Bridget? Yeah.
Yes.
Now, she actually went on to become a teacher.
Yes.
And can you share with the group when Guruji saw her in London?
Yeah. So I met Bridget first time when we were on our way to Rishikesh. And there was going to be a session there, yoga week. And Bridget was there, and she would generally wear dark colors, red, dark green. Generally, it would be red. And she was a German lady. And while talking to her, I thought, and she would walk confidently, quite confidently, except for the look in the eye. We wouldn't have made out, but the look was very clear that she couldn't see. And then while talking to her, got to know that at the age of, say, 17, in an accident, she lost her vision. So she had to train herself. And then while talking, she mentioned that how does everybody do things accurately? I'm not able to do it. And what it meant was that when people were practicing, we take our arm down. Now, if we go do our Trikonasana in the center and do it against the wall, we'll possibly realize how much we have lost the alignment, how much we have moved. But this lady would be absolutely perfect, because she would go only by her senses, and that's where she would be so balanced, absolutely balanced, internally and externally. And Guruji would often show her, all one had to do is place her in such a manner that she was facing the class, because she wouldn't have that sense. But it was, possibly would have met her, no? She used to come a lot to the institute.
I don't think I met her.
No. And she would put the mat, that would be her guide. And then, today people use the mat with the lines for external alignment. For her, it was a guide for internal alignment. And then she would say, okay, if I'm feeling, am I feeling to the armpit? If arm straight, she couldn't see, but she could feel, and you could see her body start mobilizing and doing it absolutely in a sense of balance. So she was also quite an inspiration. And later, I think she started teaching with the help of her brother. So it's all unimaginable. And that's possibly made me think of a title. Like, how do you do it? Because possibly my sense was pretty limited to think this is what one is capable of possible. There's so much more. And possibly us with all our senses and abilities intact, are we utilizing them to the fullest? Or are we going more on one side? And that's what yoga is all about, not to get carried away like a pendulum from this side to this side, but to remain and let your awareness, consciousness spread. That's where, individual, universal consciousness, whatever we talk about at the philosophical realm of yoga actually possibly happens. So it was very inspiring to see, then you started seeing, initially it was, oh my God, they're doing it. But later you saw the yoga in there. And that was something which was, I think, enlightening later.
So these are two stories of people that had lost some of their senses. Now, you also have a chapter in there of teaching yoga to children that had Down syndrome. And then it was a very enlightening conclusion by watching them, how they act.
Yes.
And how engrossed they were in tasks.
Yeah. So, I didn't teach them. My sister, Aarti, has been teaching children with special needs for many years. And there was this group which gave employment to adults with Downs, because the special needs schools stop at the age of 18 and they cannot continue. So they give them some activity, keep them occupied. Also, they earn some money and, things like that. So that group used to come to Yogacharya, and they had a very unique perspective. It was very interesting. Like when you say straight legs, they wouldn't understand. But if you say standing leg, then they understand. So, the language was different. And then you say, okay, we think. So generally, if a person had needs, we go sit in the chair, take the legs in. For them, I mean, this was all noticed by Rajvi, was that when you want to get in, the head leads. So they would go inside and then take the head. So if you are doing Viparitandasana, we would possibly, sit in the chair most of the time. How would you go in? We'll just sit inside the chair. Because that's also the language we use, sit inside the chair, so you go in. Now, what these kids would do, or adults, kids, they would see the head. So they would, no, they would come here, come in the front, and then take their head in. So you can imagine. So because their lead came from the head. So it was very, very interesting that, when you did that, they could do it. So then you realize it's possibly they see things differently. Majority of us see things in one way. And when somebody does things differently, they are labeled or thought to be different. I mean, in the earlier days, it was like, we looked like they were challenged. Now we are a little more refined and we say, they're not mentally challenged. Earlier, it used to be very crude, they're mad. I'm talking of 30, 40 years ago. Now you'll say intellectually challenged. Now you'll say spatial ability. But there was something really special, the way they understood things. So I remember she would tell me that if you tell them, they couldn't just straighten. But you say stand means straight. So it's interesting that their perceptions were different. So then you realize that everything is about perception. We are accustomed to a particular perception and we feel that is the way. But when you turn around, the whole perception is different. And possibly the more perceptions we have, we start getting more adaptable, we start getting more acceptable and more flexible in mind. I think that's more important. Then there's more acceptance. Half the issues are because of lack of flexibility, not physical, but even mental. So then we become more flexible and things, start getting it. So that's what I realized. Like it's different. And learning not just to accept, but appreciate that difference. So that's what I felt about those children there.
Before I go on further with more questions, please also online, if you have a question, put it in the chat or here. Feel free to ask Rajvi. It's not a formal presentation. We do want it to be like a chat. So if you have some questions for Rajvi, please feel free to raise your hand and ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an interaction. And
There's a story of a lady who had cancer more than once, different types of cancer and several remissions. And it's quite a remarkable story. So I'll ask Rajvi to share a little bit about that. But there's something in that story which also is throughout the book, and that's Rajvi shares with us her own initial perceptions, which I find very interesting because it highlights, how we also see things initially. And particularly with Shirley, you mentioned how you first met her at a convention and she was sort of on the side doing her own thing. And if I was a teacher, I might also think, what's this lady doing, not following the instructions? She should be following the instructions, but she's not. And Rajvi, can you talk a little bit about how you first saw her?
Many of you, if you visited Pune, you would have seen her some point of time or the other. She's been visiting a long time. Now, what had happened that we were in Israel for a convention and my brother was teaching and I was supposed to be assisting and we had to take turns. It was the first class, my first time there. And this lady is walking around, the class is on, and you know how disciplined our classes are. Like nobody just walks around, and if somebody has a problem, they tell the teacher puts them aside and do something else, or somebody else helps them. I mean, I think international, we have certain level of discipline. And this lady is walking, looking around, and then I said, do you have a problem? I mean, it's the first time, so I'll be polite, of course, I won't be stern. So, yeah, I have a problem. Okay, what's it? I have cancer. And it's such a casual. So my perception, I mean, the word see hits you. Somebody has it, and it's not an impression, it's hard. And maybe 20 years ago, burst because the treatments, things. And then she says, I'm going to get my result. I'm like, okay, the result, it's come back again. And so casual about it. So I was, my mind was like, oh, she's just talking. I mean, there's nothing serious about this, and that's her way of doing what she wants. I didn't express my judgment, which I still sometimes feel that you tend to express judgments or have it in your mind. But I spoke to the other, saying, yes, she does. And then she said, Guruji just asked me a special sequence to do. So I do it. And when she feels like, she does it. When she doesn't feel like, she just lie down with her legs up. And then when I spoke to her later, I realized she had multiple cancers. She had been treated. And later, as I got to know her more, I felt there was something very unique. First of all, to accept it. It's easy to talk about it, accept your problem, it is there. But when you really face it, I do not know. You can always advise others, but when it hits you, I don't know how it would be. And the best was when she said that she was to undergo a surgery. Fine. And in India, possibly in other countries also, surgeons have that time. They're not going to wait for your whims and fancies. And she told the surgeon, it was supposed to be some throat surgery, I want to do Sarvangasana. And she's having a bolster with her. And she says, yeah, the surgeon allowed me. I said, which surgeon is going to allow you to do a Sarvangasana? And it sounded very odd. But then when I saw her, possibly her persistence was so much that the surgeon had to give way. And that gave her that sense to accept what was happening. And once I remember she came, so I felt that she had come to Pune and said, come to Mumbai. We had cancer support groups. It would help if you would talk to people. There are a lot of support groups in the city in different hospitals, and we arranged for a talk by her or interaction in our center. And my receptionist asked me, does she really have cancer? I said, what do you mean? Because we have images, serene. But this lady is all jovial. And then she's saying, why are you making it bigger than life? It's a part of life. And that was such a big lesson, that anything is a part of life. We make it bigger than life. And then she had a photo shoot in the hospital. So she said, the wards always are very dreary. So she would go to a children's ward when she had a chemo on and lie down there, because there would be pictures and color and take photographs. So I saw it again, that's again perspective, that why should I see this part which is troubling me, but there's so much beauty around. Let me focus on that. And that again was a big eye opener. And I do tell her, and then there were a lot of practical lessons also she gave. Like, for example, she says, once treatment is done, people are in a rush. I have lost time. So let me make up. I've lost 6 months, 1 year, 2 years of my whatever productive life one was doing. And, it has come slowed down or come to a standstill. But she says, no, accept it. And it wasn't that. And then move on. So there were many lessons that came through just interaction with her. And of course, she had her own way of doing things. I think these are unique people, but they can influence. And these, I feel, are in today's world, when we have influencers, these are people who don't influence, but they impact you. They are people who really impact you. Initially, you doubt. And for me, I just started like I said, when I initially wrote the stories for Yoga Rahasya, it was a story. Like, okay, these people did yoga, and, this is how they cope with yoga. But later, I started seeing that it's all about perception. And how my perception started changing, or started getting more, I would say, refined and more all-pervasive, that you're just looking at one angle. and that I think is a big thing. Like I think even when I wrote about the prison, and well, we got a message that's, the preliminary course book by Geeta ji. It's spirally bound, and she made it spirally bound so people can refer to it like a manual, so you don't have a binding, you can turn the pages. And we got a letter from some person saying that they wanted permission to photocopy the book. Now, holier than thou, why do you want to photocopy? Buy the book. So she says, no, it's spirally bound. People can injure themselves. And then later I thought that in our college days, which was many decades, books were very expensive. We used to photocopy books. But here I was questioning her photocopying when she actually took permission. Who would have known if some prison in UK has photocopied 10 copies? So instead of seeing the honesty, I was questioning. But when I saw that that lady was teaching prisoners who were sex offenders, and well, it was curious. I don't think I've ever seen as many locks or doors in my entire life, possibly entire life. I mean, not have seen so many locks as I saw there. Even going to the European countries where you have locks put up near lakes, n number of locks. And well, they were all well behaved and they had certain, you couldn't touch them, you had to instruct, and this lady was doing it. But after the session got over, then you saw the whole noise, and then that fear gripped, because you are in one of the high intensity prisons in UK in Hull. And that's when you realize. And these people said they took light on yoga, they borrowed it from the library along with this book, which we of course had photocopied, and they were doing it in their cells. And that was helping them. Then it made you realize the impact of Guruji's teachings on us, fine, but people who had, the extreme end of life in terms of their activities, their social stature, everything. And even there was an upliftment, So it also made you realize the impact of the subject and the way Guruji made it accessible to all. So then you see the power of, if you think of it, a single man, literally, who could break across all man-made barriers. Think of it. What do we have in common? In that sense, culture, language, religion, everything may be different. But just the yoga, how he could reach out. So I think that's where you realize it when you meet these people. So, yeah.
Then Rita, did you have a question?
Okay.
Marion, can you bring the, it was.
She has to leave.
And a pen. So we're just getting a couple of copies of the book signed for a student that has traveled a long way to get here and has to leave soon.
Thank you.
So while that's being done,
that's a name, right? Okay.
Earlier Rajvi referred to her sister Arti, who's also an Iyengar yoga teacher. Now, actually, all of Rajvi's siblings are Iyengar yoga teachers. So her parents were students of Guruji.
My father. Later, my mother joined.
Yeah. So it's in the whole family. Yeah. And I believe her brother Birju was in Malaysia just recently teaching.
Day before.
Yes. So we're very fortunate to have them come to Southeast Asia to share what they've learned from Guruji. There's another part in this story about Shirley, the lady that had multiple cancers, about the first time she went to the institute in Pune. So she went to the institute, first class, second asana. She was in remission. So she didn't look like anything was wrong. So first class, second pose, a tap on the shoulder. She was asked to go back to the back of the room. Guruji had seen her and noticed something is not right about this lady. And he said to her, you have to come to medical class and I'll take care of you. So Guruji had that ability to see.
I mean, you wonder how. It's I sometimes wonder, many decades later, people who have not met him may really wonder, is it possible? Or are we faking stories? Like trying to. So it's so true. So often we've seen that.
Yeah.
He could see through. So those of you who have met him or, heard first-hand stories, but many, many things. He could read through the mind of a person. I don't know how.
And then on the other hand, there was like a very practical nature to his advice, to his teaching, things that we should have thought of, but often we didn't. So that comes up when you mention that, when you talk about the story about the Gujarat earthquake.
Yes.
And being sent there.
Yes.
Can you share?
So it was 2001, 26 Jan, which is the Republic Day of India. And there was a very big earthquake in Gujarat, the western state of India. And my parents and we come from there. But irrespective, at such times, everybody wants to help out in whatever way. And most of the time, it's in cash or kind that you help. What else can we do? So I received a phone call from some random person saying that, would you like to help out? Sure, we can. I mean, of course, the students would gather some funds, blankets. It was winter. And that area is a desert type of area. So, it would be cold. Sure. He said, can you come and teach them yoga? And for a moment, I was like, why would they want to do yoga in this time? She said, yes, if you could. Very promptly, I said yes. And they had decided we'll discuss the logistics, 5 weeks or 6 weeks. And then I went there and I went to Guruji, yes, they've asked us to teach yoga. Do you know what to teach? I said, no idea, because who's seen this level of tragedy? I mean, volunteers came in, there's a bunch of enthusiastic teachers, students, but then we were lost. I was totally psyched because we would have seen tragedy of a loss of a loved one. But here they were in hundreds and thousands, entire villages wiped out. It was a Republic Day, so there was a parade of school children, and that some 100 kids just went underneath. So these were stories which were hard. And how do you communicate with them? We had taught yoga, yes, taught in the center, to students who wanted to learn. Here was an organization. It was the Aga Khan Foundation, technically Muslim. And, these times religion plays a role, sort of. But they wanted to do yoga, and then they arranged for us. So when we all went to Guruji, what to do? The first advice he gave, don't go in your t-shirt and shorts. And, possibly it wouldn't have even struck us. Yoga means yoga clothes. So he said, wear a sari. And we were like, we don't even wear saris normally. Saying they have to accept you. What are you going to teach them? Somebody said that these people were so traumatized. They had everything now. A lot of organizations had given them food, blankets, computers, activities, but they were so tormented. There were people who hadn't slept for days. Now you can imagine no sleep for days. What is this thing? So they needed some calm. And, they said that yoga can give it. And they obviously had heard about Guruji and they were in Mumbai. So they called up. Then he advised us so many things, which honestly we wouldn't have thought. Like first is dress like them, be like them. Sounds a very non-yogic kind. What is there? But if they didn't accept us, what are we going to teach them? They will say. Second was Shavasana, eyes open, which was a very important. Eyes would close, the memories would flood back. So eyes open. And also what way we should be teaching them asanas, all that guidance. I remember we even went and met a psychologist who was dealing with trauma to understand what it would be. And then exactly a month later, so I was in the first group, we had made groups of 4 each. And I said, yes, Guruji, this is the whole list of people who have agreed to go. First 4, and then we'll have an overlap. Saying all this nice on paper. But if you don't create an interest, there'll be no second, third, fourth, fifth group. So now the tension was much more because at that point, I was only third teacher. There were other students, assistants. Another person was much senior to me in learning, but she was not teaching regularly. And then we went there. So they were not welcoming. They said, yes, they have brought us. Why? We have already had enough difficulties in the camp where they were. Why do we need yoga? Because perception of yoga was, exercising. We don't need it. So we just said that, smiled, ate with them in the camp, all the refugee stuff. And then second day, then they arranged for something. They said, you don't do anything in this area, which was called the Jamaat Khana, which was a prayer room. Now, we said, okay, anything objectionable means no recitation of invocation. We said, fair enough, doesn't matter. And then they called people to listen. So first class, 2 people turned up. And there were about 400 families into so many people in the camp. So second night, I started getting sleepless nights because if they don't come, we'll go back and tell Guruji there's no second group and who's responsible. Then they arranged for a talk and we started talking and somewhere we talked about sleep. And one lady came and she's saying, my father-in-law has not slept for a month. And there were some 7 or 9 people living in that tent. And if he can. Now, that was a challenge because he had lost, 7 generations were staying in that village. So I said, okay, now what do we do? Because, so only thing that came in mind was, and what do you find there? There were no props, obviously. They were in a little bed, also makeshift. So there was some pillow, made him lie down on the pillow. And he was shaking. So we just put some weight and pillow and propped the chest. And Guruji's grace, he slept that night. So, in a camp, good news and not so good news spread. So news spread, this old man, 72-year-old had slept. And then we started getting students. So then the session went on for 5 weeks. Later we realized, because then they took us to another campsite, that it was effective. Your children would come and sit with us, ask us to teach them English and stuff, because it was a long whole day we were with them. And they would walk with all the sand in and all. And then when we went to this other site, there it was so silent. 50 kids in the room, pin drop silence, not a teacher around. And then we realized the impact that yoga was making. Because these kids were all playing around. And then, it was because we had to be so careful talking to them also. We didn't know who'd lost a sibling, who'd lost a parent. So it was a big learning, not only on how to teach, how to adapt, but how to learn. Because these people, I still remember there was this lady in a blue sari, it's so many years. She came and said, she was the oldest in that group, must be late 60s. She said, a lot of people have come and given us lectures, how to bear this problem. Because they would have a lot of counselors coming. A lot of support groups were there, religious groups. There was a lot of support on all fronts from various organizations. But she said, and they were well fed, well taken care of. Everything was good. They arranged classes for children. We are talking of 2001, computer classes, a lot of stuff. They said, we are the only people who have taught us how to deal with it. We know it is our karma. We'll have to bear it. You people taught us how. And then I realized much more that, the power again, that it's the how. Because talks can do one thing, it may engross you, it may inspire you, but the effect that is there. So why Guruji insists so much on practice? Because practice, and that too not mechanical practice, being sensitive to your practice, and then you realize how much it can do. Because this came from a lady who was that practice for 5-6 days. But for her to say that, I think was very touching, and for me to realize the power again of the subject. Why I keep saying the power of the subject? Because I started very young. It wasn't like a before and after story. I had this problem, I did yoga, I got cured of it or felt better. It was just part of growing up. So how do I know what the subject does? In that sense, you're just doing it. So you can't say I do this, that's why I am like this. So I felt that these kind of things had a bigger impact to realize the power of the subject. Yeah.
I would like to ask a question. Do you still remember how did you make that old man fall asleep?
No, so there was a bed. It was, the charpai we have in India. So there are jute and they crisscross it. And there were some pillows. So all we did was propped up the pillows. And then, what you would do, move the shoulders back, adjust the head. And I really feel it was grace more than anything that we did. Or maybe the fear, the loss makes the body shrink. If I analyze today, that time it was intuitive. We were couple of us, four of us, like I said, two of us doing things. But later I feel that, if I try to analyze, when there is fear, we close in, we shrink. And there is fear, there is loss, there is grief, there's so much. And therefore it was possibly shrinking, and that opening maybe gave that sense of quietness to him to allow him to sleep. I don't know whether he slept the whole night, but at least the daughter-in-law felt he slept enough not to disturb the others. So that's where you see the supported shavasana, what we would have said. But sometimes when things are so bad, it is very effective.
Actually, in the epilogue of the book, Rajvi shares the sequence that Guruji gave them to teach to the survivors of the earthquake.
Yes.
And another sequence,
Yeah.
which Guruji also gave during when there was a swine flu.
Yeah, 2008.
Yeah, in Pune, and the institute closed. So the students had already traveled there from overseas, were stuck with no institute to go to, but Guruji gave a sequence that would help build immunity.
Yes.
And that's also in the book at the back.
So after this, immediately there was this 9/11 in the US, and I just wrote to our New York friends whether they were safe. And they said there was so much of fear because of, whatever had happened. And then she said, can you share? Because it was natural disaster. This was another kind of disaster. Then Guruji, of course, advised something else, because since they are already students, you can't just copy paste this and send it there. They're already students of yoga. They have the props. They are not in camps. So what they can do? And then that became very popular then, and across the country for a while, people started. So I think it made a difference, and that's whatever yoga methodology one followed, tradition, everybody started following it. And then, it was good because that it needed some support to overcome the fear that existed then.
Any other questions?
Just curious. You learn yoga like as part of your education at school, like part of the curriculum, or how did you come across?
It's interesting.
I'll just repeat the question. June was asking, how did Rajvi learn yoga? Was it part of the curriculum in school?
At that time, we did not have yoga as a part of a curriculum. So maybe some schools had it, but most of the schools, we did not have yoga as a part of a curriculum. That time, yoga was not really a part of everyday life. It was something people knew there was something like yoga. You did if you were unwell or if you were old, kind of thought process. So I just happened to, because my father was always interested in yoga and spirituality, including my grandmother. So somebody introduced him to Guruji, and he just got interested. I mean, he knew this was somebody. So we were too small to object. So one by one, we all started joining classes. Not that it wasn't something we didn't look forward to or look forward to. I would say it was just normal. When you go to school, you go to the yoga class. That it wasn't something special, or nor was it something abnormal. It was just a routine which even till today, we have the Sunday morning classes in Mumbai, which still continue. So you can imagine, and these classes had started when Guruji used to visit Mumbai in the 1950s. So generations, it's the second and third generation which is in now. So we were just, I would say, very fortunate. Otherwise, I don't think we would have ventured into yoga. There were many other things to do.
And within Rajvi's family, the next generation has also taken on yoga. So Rajvi's brother Birju, his son, when he comes via Hong Kong on business, he'll come to the studio to connect with. He's a practitioner as well.
Yeah, it's something everybody grew up with.
I was wondering, would you guys discuss yoga inside the family, inside the house? Because you're all practicing.
No, depends. I mean, it's nothing like special. Like sometimes, yes, you're back from class and you talk about, class and what happened. So in fact, that has been very normal. Even before we started attending yoga classes, my father would come back from class and, lunch, he would have stories. This is what I remember ages ago about what Guruji said and what Barjo uncle said and what he couldn't do. And, you could visualize. You had never seen these people. You had not seen Guruji. So you sort of visualize these people. And so, yeah, even now, like we come back, we will say, okay, what happened in class or something. But it's not something very, it's just routine. Like you may talk about it suddenly. So it's not like a formal discussion on a serious talk on yoga. No, that doesn't happen.
We've touched on a lot of the stories from the book. There's an epilogue where Rajvi summarizes a lot of the themes that come up in the book. And there's a sentence in that book which I'm quite intrigued by. It's talking about Guruji, and Rajvi says, he redefined health as the state of well-being of the body, mind, emotions, intellect, consciousness, morality, sociality, and conscience, which ultimately leads to a state of divine health. Now, I think for a lot of students that are newer to yoga or the general population, yes, they understand that health is the body, the mind, maybe even the emotions. But then there are these other layers like sociality and conscience. Can you say a little bit about it?
So once or many times Guruji would refer to, he would say there are 7 states of consciousness, there are various states of health. And one is physical skeletal-muscular health, which when it goes bad, we are all very aware of it. Then the organic health, health of our organs, the physiological body, the mind and the emotions, and then the health of the intelligence. So that would be like your level of awareness of the body. So when you say awareness, it's beyond the body, like especially after talking about all the senses of perception, it's the heightened awareness that would be there. Then he started talking about social health. So if all this is there, then you become a different person. So then he talked about moral health. Now, what is moral health? We defined Ashtanga Yoga as Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, and we say Yama, then Niyama, then Asana. So most people who analyze the sutra would say you need discipline first, then you come to asana. Like Ashtanga Yoga, 8 steps of yoga. And Guruji would always say Ashtadala Yoga, 8 aspects of yoga, 8 petals of yoga. So what he started saying was that if you practice asana, you automatically follow yama. So it is not that yama is enforced on you. So again, to narrate, there was this series of books written, Yoga Shastra, tome 1 to 5 for children. Actually, it is also how to teach children, especially level 3, 4 and 5 actually talk of Ayurveda and a lot of other stuff. So when we were editing the first one, and this goes back about 25, 28 years ago, and there it was written, when you get established in truth. Now, I was also, as I say, when you are young, there's a lot of arrogance. I do believe it. Maybe it's not with everybody, maybe with me. You think you know. You don't know, and because you don't know, you think you know. And then it was, how do you get established? You speak the truth. You do what is right, kind of. Then later it dawned, what Guruji was saying was that when you practice asana, there is no scope for you to do untruth. You are established in truth. There is no choice you have to make. Should I be honest or should I be dishonest? There is just no option. You get established. So that is what was the moral health. That you just follow the path of Yama and Niyama. You just follow it. And then comes the social health. So now if a person like Guruji is around, our behavior changes. So automatically you're bringing a societal change. So if one Guruji has created such an impact, now if you think back, many of us, we don't know what direction our lives would have taken. Apart from teaching yoga, the profession of yoga, but as an individual, as a human being, we don't know what direction our lives would be, apart from all the health and whatever. So you realize that how society can be changed. In the same way, if somebody is just annoyed at work, workplace is toxic, They may not do anything. What happens at home? That goes back on the family. Then the family goes back on maybe the helpers, and it becomes a vicious circle. So how social health? And then he talked about the health of the conscience, the antakarna, which later he started referring to as the dharmendriya, which Prashantji often refers to in classes, that your conscience pricks you. Nobody else knows what you have done is right or wrong. But your conscience tells you this is not what I should have done, or this is what I should do. And that is the health of the conscience. And then if you think back, this is again my belief that as children, the health of the conscience is very strong. Infants. Physical health is not so important. They fall, they cry, they forget, and they're back to doing the same thing again. But conscience pricks them much. So something has happened, they want to go and tell their parents, I did this, and get it out of their system. But when we get older, our physical health becomes more important. This muscle is paining, but the conscience is subdued. So that gets awakened. So I think that is also the whole. And then Guruji said, when all this is there, you have divine health. So these are basically Guruji's. So then you sort of start with the skeletomuscular, you penetrate. And then what he would say, periphery to the core. So when you're saying you're, going from the periphery to the core, and then core to the periphery. So that's where you become one with the whole. So that's where he went. And then, sort of you get glimpses sometimes. You don't get it. We are not the yogi that Guruji was. But even when you get that, that's a feeling, I wouldn't call it a high, but a feeling of satisfaction. I mean, I don't even have the right word. Divinity is too high a word. But there's a certain feeling of joy, I would say, that comes, even momentarily.
So thank you, Rajvi, for sharing this stories and your insights.
Thank you.
The book is a very riveting read. It's so riveting. This morning when I was at the airport waiting for Rajvi, I was reading the book and she walked past me and I didn't realize. And then she messaged me and said, I'm already here. Where are you? Because I was so engrossed in the book. So I highly recommend you get a copy.
So happy to hear that.
Where can we get the book, George? Where could we get the book from? Is it Amazon or something?
The book is available here for sale. But I think it's also available on Amazon.
Yeah, but you can possibly check with the associations because Amazon individually prints it. So it's just exorbitantly heavily priced.
Check with your association.
Yeah, Kindle may not be.
Yeah, actually, I have it on Kindle and I also have the hard copy.
Yeah. Kindle, of course, would be available on Amazon.
So if you've brought your copy or purchased a copy, feel free to come up and ask Rajvi to sign for you. But also, let's give her a few minutes rest before 5 o'clock. She does her lecture demonstration. Okay, so students online, I'm going to end the meeting here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
And maybe we'll see you at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Thank you.